You ever have one of those mornings where you're so sure the day's gonna be peaceful, just like every other, and then bam, life sucker punches you right in the gut, yeah. Well, let me tell you about the morning my world turned upside down, all because of a woman named Margaret, the kind of person folks quietly call a Karen when she's not around. She had no idea she was about to mess with the sheriff's daughter or that she'd picked the absolute wrong dad to push. It started with that shrill, angry voice cutting through my kitchen window. "You can't be here." I dropped my coffee and tore across the house, heart pounding in my chest because I just knew something was wrong. Outside by the creek, my 5-year-old Sophie was flapping her hands and humming like she always does when she's happy. That little patch of grass by the water, it's been her safe haven since the first day we moved in. Sophie's on the autism spectrum, and let me tell you, the sound of that creek is her anchor, her whole routine. She doesn't speak much, but when she does, it's like the sun peeking out after a storm. That morning, though, the only voices I heard were angry. Margaret was bearing down on my girl arms, waving words slicing through the air. 50-ish gray bob, never a hair out of place, always dripping in clothes way too nice for a morning walk. You know the type, every HOA's worst nightmare. She yanked Sophie's arm, and the sound that came out of my daughter was something I'd never heard before. Pure panic. I tore outside, shouting for her to stop, but it was like I wasn't even there. Margaret dragged Sophie to the little wooden bridge and shoved her just like that straight off the edge. The creek's not deep, maybe 3 feet, but it's rocky, the water's ice cold, and my daughter's tiny, trembling in her favorite yellow dress with the flowers. She hit the water hard, and her scream, it still echoes in my chest sometimes. Margaret stood there on the bridge, arms crossed, looking smug. I didn't see regret on her face, not even a flicker. I scrambled down, scooped Sophie up. She was soaked, shivering lips blue, her hands over her ears, rocking back and forth. I wrapped her up in my arms and whispered, "It's okay, baby. Daddy's here." She held on tight, so tight I thought she'd never let go. I looked up at Margaret and she just sneered. "You should control your kid. This isn't a playground for special needs children." Man, you ever feel so angry you're shaking, but you know you gotta hold it together for someone more important. That was me. I carried Sophie home, got her into dry clothes, wrapped her in her favorite blanket, tucked Mr. Buttons the teddy bear under her arm, and just tried to bring her back to herself. But the damage was done. Her safe place was gone just like that. Emily, my wife Sophie's mom, she's a nurse, tough as nails, but she was wrecked when I called. "Don't let that woman get away with this," she said. Thing is, Margaret had no idea who she'd just tangled with. She saw me as another neighbor she could steamroll. But I'm the county sheriff, and if you think that doesn't come with some tools, well, let's just say she was about to find out. After making sure Sophie was stable, I headed over to Margaret's place, perfect lawn, not a blade out of line mailbox, polished to a mirror shine. She opened the door with this forced plastic smile. "What do you want?" she snapped. I laid it out. "Why did you push my daughter off that bridge?" She didn't flinch, didn't apologize, just rattled off something about HOA rules and dangerous kids. She said if you can't follow the rules, maybe you shouldn't live here. When I pointed out she'd assaulted a 5-year-old, she laughed. "Don't be dramatic." Right then I knew I wasn't going to get through to her. So I walked away while she kept yapping, thinking she'd won. She had no clue. Back at my place, I called Mike Rodriguez, my best deputy. Run everything you can on Margaret Ellison, I said. Mike didn't ask questions. He knew I meant business. While I waited for the background check, I started talking to neighbors. The stories poured out Margaret, threatening to tow cars, fining people for a newspaper on the driveway, telling a family to get rid of their wheelchair ramp because it was ugly. One after another, people shared how she'd targeted their kids, especially if they had special needs. Mike called back 3 hours later. Turns out Margaret had left a trail of complaints behind her harassment in every city she'd lived in, fights over property lines, even accusations of stalking and mailbox tampering. She'd screamed at another autistic kid in Austin, blocked a school bus, tried to ban a boy with Down syndrome from the pool. Margaret wasn't having a bad day, she was the problem. That's when I got serious. I filed a formal complaint with the HOA, laid out every detail, photos, witness statements, everything. Mrs. Jenkins, who'd watched the whole thing from her kitchen window, told me that woman's a menace. I'll testify, but the board? They looked nervous. Margaret had handpicked most of them. She was queen bee, and nobody wanted to poke the hive. So I took it up a notch. I went down to the police station and filed a report for assault and battery on a minor. Didn't flash my badge, just said I was a father whose little girl had been attacked. Sophie, meanwhile, was terrified. She wouldn't go near the creek, woke up crying from nightmares, barely spoke. Emily and I took turns sitting up with her at night, holding her while she whimpered herself back to sleep. We started seeing Dr. Martinez, a specialist in autism. She said it'd take time, but Sophie could heal with help. Therapy cost money we didn't have, but I wasn't stopping. I kept digging, and what I found was sickening. Margaret had made up the rule about kids not being allowed by the creek. Nothing in the bylaws said that. She'd just invented it to suit her, just like she always did. Every neighbor I talked to had another story: Margaret banning, fining, bullying. She was a one-woman wrecking crew. 2 weeks later, the HOA board finally called a meeting. Margaret strutted in, wearing a navy business suit, like she was royalty. I brought Mrs. Jenkins a handful of witnesses and something special body cam footage from when I confronted Margaret. She didn't know I'd recorded her admitting plain as day, kids like that are a burden on society. Parents should keep them locked up. Yeah, that happened. Margaret tried to spin her story, saying Sophie had just slipped, and she gently tried to guide her away. Mrs. Jenkins let loose, telling everyone exactly what she'd seen. Then I played the footage, Margaret's own words, nasty as they come filling the room. Board members went pale. I laid out her whole history, every complaint, every lie. David Chin, a board member, moved to kick her out as president on the spot. The vote was unanimous. Margaret stood up red-faced, shouting that we'd regret it, that she'd sue us all. That's when I pulled out my badge and set it on the table. I'm Sheriff Morrison. You're being arrested for assault and battery on a minor. She went white as a sheet. 2 days later, Detective Williams served her with an arrest warrant. The news picked up the story, neighbors rallied, and the internet lit up with justice for Sophie. Someone painted child abuser on Margaret's mailbox, and angry notes piled up on her porch. She lawyered up, but the evidence was overwhelming: video witnesses, the whole 9 yards. 6 months later, we were in court. The place was packed. Neighbors, disability advocates, reporters. Mrs. Jenkins testified. I testified. Dr. Martinez explained what Sophie had gone through. Margaret took the stand blaming us, saying she'd tried to protect Sophie from herself. The jury took less than 2 hours guilty on all counts. Judge Williams laid into her 8 months jail, probation community service with disabled kids, restitution for therapy costs. Watching Margaret led away in handcuffs was almost cinematic, but the real victory came after. Her house sold to a family with twin boys who have ADHD. David Chin took over the HOA, and one of his first acts was putting a bench by the creek with a plaque, "A place for all children to find joy and calm." Sophie started healing slowly but surely. The nightmares faded, and one day she let me take her back to the water hand in hand. Our neighbors stepped up in ways I'll never forget. Mrs. Jenkins started a fundraiser for Sophie's therapy. Miguel Rodriguez, the boy Margaret tried to ban from the pool, gave Sophie a drawing of her at the creek surrounded by butterflies. A year later, we threw the first Inclusion Day celebration, and Sophie was the star, laughing, flapping, just being herself, while the whole community cheered her on. So you want to talk about justice. It's not just what happens in a courtroom. It's neighbors standing up for each other, making sure nobody gets left behind, and a little girl who gets to feel safe again right where she belongs. You know what I mean, but let's be real, Margaret. Lost, sure, but this kind of stuff happens in neighborhoods everywhere, every day. So let me ask, was justice really served, or are there more Margarets out there waiting to be called out? Where's the line between rules and compassion in a community? I'd love to hear what you think. Did we do the right thing, or should we have handled it differently? Drop your thoughts below, because honestly, these are the conversations that matter most.